Hey, my friends, this is the dungeon model for Scholomance, the insane sort of haunted mansion of World of Warcraft. But how would it actually fit into its spot in Western Plaguelands here? And when you're in the instance, what's really going on outside of Kirtonos' balcony? And then, like, how does or how would the dungeon's model actually fit into its spot on the map? That's the stuff we're going to look at here today, but we're going to start off with a quick but full walkthrough of the model to orient ourselves. So, of course, you start off here in WPL on the island, and you go in this ruined keep model and through the locked door and then down the hallway here, and you zone in, and we're in this hallway first to make our way across this first room, which is actually a bridge that we'll pass underneath later in the dungeon. But we first move into this room called the Relinquery, which is where we could fight the Blood Steward of Kirtonos to get the blood to summon Kirtonos out on the balcony. But typically you'll quickly go down these stairs first into this next big square room, the Chamber of Summoning, which of course has the balcony we'll look at in a second. Or you can continue across through this next gate, which leads into a room that's not named in the game like the other rooms, but it's like a hub because there are another 3 ways out of this room in addition to the door that you just came in. You can first go through this right side door, down another staircase, and this leads into another unnamed room full of zombies and skeletons with Jandis Barov at the end. And then you'd have to double back up to the room that we called the hub, and would next go straight across into this next room called the ossuary, which is full of whelps and their trainers. And this room is directly on top of this like basement room here, which has a bunch of these bone mobs, and then of course Rattlegore in the middle. After him, you go back up to that hub room one more time and through the third door, which was on the left as you entered, and you clear through here and you open a gate. From there you enter the viewing room, which has 2 optional bosses and a bunch of passive mobs. And typically you'll go straight across this room through the first gate, which leads to a stairway going down to the laboratory with Raz Frostwhisper. And a high-level raiding guild alchemists will know this room well as the place they can make flasks if BWL is not available. But back to the viewing room and through the other gate, which leads to the large final area called the Headmaster's Study, which has 6 rooms branching off it, each containing a mini-boss. So going quickly, you have the first room, the Coven, with Instructor Militia. Below that, you have the Vault of the Ravinian. Shifting over, this is the Hall of the Damned with Dr. Theoden Krastanov, or the Butcher. And below him, this is the Barov family vault with Lord Alexei Barov. And then the third section of 2 rooms, this is the Hall of Secrets with Lorekeeper Polkit. And below him we have the Shadow Vault with Lady Alusha Barov. And once you've killed all 6 of them, you spawn Darkmaster Ganling in the middle, and hopefully he has the tier 0 dungeon set helm that you wanted. Okay, so when you're inside Skolo, there's only one spot where you can actually see the outside world, and it's here on Kirtonos' balcony. And to understand what's outside, it's really good to know that when we first zone into Skolo, we're actually moving from here in WPL on map 0, Eastern Kingdoms. And from like a story perspective, the whole place would be under this keep and behind like these terraced walls here. We zone in and are moved from map 0 to this map, map 289, Scholomance, which is also called School of Necromancy in the game files. And this map is a rough copy of 16 chunks of the Eastern Kingdoms map, but it's been heavily altered. The whole thing looks like this, including these weird white square sections and broken water and big flat area instead of the terraced area that's in Eastern Kingdoms. And we're going to tour this entire map in a sec, but if we were first able to fly past the invisible walls and out of the model, here's what we'd see. So you've got the balcony portion of the model sticking through the terrain, and a bit of the terrain over the top of that model is broken. The water sort of just ends or is like floating. And if we move up a bit, you can see that the dungeon model is sort of buried in this big flat area with like a missing or open square there in the middle. And if we go now to the model viewer and spin the Skolo model around into roughly the same orientation, you can see that the model must be in the terrain, sort of like this. And you can see that that hallway where we first enter is what's popping up through the broken square in the terrain on that flat area back there. And again, just to like orient ourselves, on the map, we'd be looking at the balcony and the island section from the red arrow perspective here. And so to look from another angle, if we move down to the south side of the map, like this, you can really see that this large flat area has replaced the detailed island version from the Eastern Kingdoms map. And it's got almost like two arms facing south and then over here to the west. And if we move toward the entrance hallway I mentioned before, and again, for reference, this is the exact same spot in the Eastern Kingdoms. It looks like this, but in the instance version, we're here. And if we move over to this spot, sure enough, we start to clip in and out of the dungeon. And as I mentioned in other videos, here's this concept of culling or view culling, where the game is only rendering sections or portions of the model or the terrain, depending on our camera position, which is why the different rooms pop in and out of view as we move around a bit. But from here, we can see the bridge room where we first start off and the relinquary further over. And if we move a bit, we see the room I called the hub. And again, stuff pops in and out of view as we move around. So slightly different perspective if we move back out here to where we can see what I called like the two arms of the terrain. From this spot, again, orienting on the map, we'd be right here, looking the way the arrow is pointing. And our dungeon model would be oriented roughly like this, with one arm being the Raz Frostwhisper laboratory here, and the other being the sort of like mini boss chamber with the butcher's room out here at the end, or the westmost or right side here. And if we orient the model roughly the same as our exterior view, we can infer that the model is situated like this. And to check that, we can move over to the cliff here, like this, clip into the southern arm, and sure enough, we see that we're now over the top of the lab. And there's Raz down there. And it's the same thing if we head over to, I keep calling these like the arms in the landscape. We clip into the other one. We can see Krastanov or the butcher down there. And if we mess with our orientation a little bit, there we can see Alexei Barov in the room directly below. So again, like I get that none of this stuff really matters, but to me it's so interesting that for nothing more than this simple view out of the balcony, so much of this modified section of Western Plaguelands exists. And on that note, let's quickly explore the rest of the map. So we'll start off here on the south side of Scholomance, sort of over the Raz laboratory section that we just looked at. And we'll follow along with our red dot on the map on the right. So first off, if we turn south, here we get to what would be the northern section of the hinterlands. And then we'll quickly reach the map border. We can zoom over to the west here, and we get to what for me is one of the most interesting aspects of many of these maps, and that's these big white unfinished squares that are just carved out of the rest of the terrain. And now heading north, and I'm going to slow this down a little bit. We get to this flat green section, which would be the early version of what becomes Sorrow Hill. And in the Eastern Kingdoms map, there's water and a big brick bridge spanning these two roads here. And this would be like the right or east side of Enderhall here. But of course, none of its models or NPCs are there. So then continuing on, we have a copy of one of the Cauldron quest areas. This one's the Writhing Haunt Cauldron. And then if we continue to the north, I'm going to speed this up quite a bit because as we get into northern WPL and EPL, my client here, the lighting turns to like night or it's very dark. And this whole area is just a lot of unfinished hills and areas of these zones without any of their models or NPCs or anything like that. But for me, again, it's still so interesting that they went to all this trouble to copy and then modify this large section of Western and Eastern Plaguelands just to build out the view outside of the balcony. And I'll tell you, my theory is that in these early dungeons, they wanted to keep the option of maybe having more areas open or maybe windows in the dungeons, but that just didn't end up happening when they finalized the dungeon. Anyway, as we get our way back down to now southern Eastern Plaguelands, we again come to another big sheared off wall of terrain and the other white square of missing terrain and texture. And then we can quickly zoom over to the very corner of the map here. Now back to the main area where we started off. And the last thing to look at here is this water, which is just sort of partially floating above the ground instead of filling in all the way to the edges of the land like it normally would do. So there's our entire map. And now last but certainly not least, let's look at how our model here would fit onto the maps that we looked at. And if we orient it into this sort of top-down view like that, then we start off here with the instance version of the map, map 289. And fortunately, our common point is the roof part of the balcony. And we can see that the model would line up like this. And then if we bring in the Eastern Kingdoms map, zoom in, and then line up our model again using the balcony cover thing, and I left the map a little smaller this time, you can see the model wouldn't quite fit on the island, and the entryway, which is this little hallway thing, I can sort of move the model in and out a bit. It doesn't actually line up with the keep where we would enter. So again, it's interesting to me, none of that actually matters, and the fact that the dungeon is so much bigger once you're inside is actually a big part of what I think makes Scholomance one of the absolute all-time best dungeons in the game. Okay, so massive thanks yet again to Marlamin and Kruithne for their work on the WoW tools and WoW export resources that I use to look at the maps and the models. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.